A few things are guaranteed in life: death, taxes, and Konami's obsession with making nostalgic support for all of Yugi's monsters, good or bad. You have your good ones with cards like Dark Magician and Buster Blader, then you have puzzling support that fell flat on its face, like Jack's Knight, Blackluster Soldier, and Gaia. The most unexpected had to be the ones for the Silent Magician and Silent Swordsman that came out in 2016, as these cards hadn't had any support for them in over 11 years until Duelist Pack Rival of the Pharaoh. Did the support help? Well, of course not. You wouldn't be able to have this video to watch at 3 AM if they turned out fantastic. There were still too many holes and weaknesses for this archetype to be good, and we got all the details on why this silent duo stayed silent in Yu-Gi-Oh's TCG. The first of the duo to make their debut was Silent Swordsman Level 3 and Silent Swordsman Level 5, who debuted in Yu-Gi-Oh's TCG set Flames of Eternity. Both were warrior-type monsters, and you could guess their levels by looking at their names. Level 3 had 1000 attack and defense and could negate spell cards that targeted him. During your standby phase, you could send this face-up card to the graveyard to spell to summon Silent Swordsman Level 5 from your deck. Level 5 had 2300 attack and 1000 defense, was unaffected by all your opponent's spell cards, and had the same condition to level 3, which was to send it off during the standby phase, but only if you inflicted a direct attack damage with this card to summon Silent Swordsman Level 7, who didn't come out in Flames of Eternity for some strange reason. It was introduced as a bundle in Yu-Gi-Oh 7 Trials of Glory video game alongside Kaiba-Man and Mind Control. Stood out at 2800 attack, 1000 defense, couldn't be normal summoner set, and negated all spell cards on the field. Cool sword, cool helm, excellent effect, but a terrible archetype. If you've seen our previous video on the level up cards, you already understand why this archetype was leveled into trash cans. Level up cards had a lot of restrictions as a way to balance out their powerful effects. Cards like Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 4 required you to destroy a monster by battle to meet its condition to reach level 6. It was already an imposing task to do with a card that maxed out at 1600 attack and level 4, in a format where battle traps like Bottomless Trap Hole could handle problematic monsters right on summon. It was also probably the best way to handle a card with an effect like level 7. The continuous effect completely shuts down every spell, whether already on the field or newly activated, which is entirely insane to print on a card. If we can compare what spell cards mean to any decks being built, it would be oxygen to the body. Unlike traps, they can be activated immediately if the conditions are met and have some of the most vital abilities, from searching through your deck to destroying cards on the field. Even a simple card like Pot of Greed, which lets you draw 2 cards, is on the ban list because it generates extra cards for free at no cost. Without spells, almost every deck would not be playable. This is why you see a lot of heavy conditions and requirements for most of the cards that can negate spell cards. The few that are in the game are usually counter traps or cards with specific spell conditions. Cards like Spell Counselor, which needs to be tribute summoned, and Nature Beast, which can only be synchro summoned with Earth Tuner and a non-tuner, are prime examples of solid spell negations with specific requirements to be put on the field, and aren't impossible to remove from the field with having low attacks, and can easily be swung over. The only spell negation card that was way too simple to be left in the game was Imperial Order. Simply setting the card and activating on your opponent's turn took away all ability to play spells. Even when it got an errata to having to pay 700 life points per standby phase to give on the field, it still didn't deter players from playing this card, because every player understands how strong it is to take away access to your spell cards. So as much as the conditions meant to play Silent Swordsman level 7 sucked, it was most likely necessary to ensure that it didn't wholly halt gameplay. If spell negation is already challenging to overcome in today's current format, just imagine how difficult it was back when normal summoning a monster and ending your turn was a common occurrence. Next up, we have Silent Swordsman level 4 and Silent Magician level 8, who debuted in Yu-Gi-Oh Nightmare Troubadour game for the DS. Silent Magician level 4 was 1000 attack and defense, the same stat line as Silent Swordsman level 3. Every time your opponent draws a card, it gains a spell counter. It also gained 500 attack for each spell counter it had. To level it up, this card had to be sent to the graveyard during the next standby phase after it had 5 spell counters to summon level 8. Silent Magician level 8 was 3500 attack and 1000 defense. It can be summoned through the effects of Silent Magician level 4 and was completely unaffected by spell cards. A fun fact about Silent Magician level 8 is that it's the strongest level up monster to date in terms of attack power. And only the Silent Magician and Dark Mimics are the only level up cards with only 2 cards for their level up. Too bad this card's level up requirement is abysmal. While most of them did have demanding conditions, this one entirely depended on your opponent for almost 5 turns. Having to wait for your opponent to draw cards 5 times and expecting your card to live in a format where Snatch Steal, BLS, and Lightning Vortex lived, and that the card started at 1000 attack, you'd have better luck playing the lotto than this card successfully getting 5 counters. Furthermore, cards like Pot of Greed and Graceful Charity were still in the game, but they were only at 1 copy. It's more than likely your opponent would just hold these cards in hand until they handled your Silent Magician level 4. Silent Magician level 8 isn't a payoff either. While being unaffected by spell cards and having 3500 attack is decent, it didn't hinder your opponent from playing the game. Detrimental cards like Heavy Storm and Delinquent Duo could still be played and affect the rest of your field. It wasn't like Silent Magician was impossible to remove from the field either. Although it was immune to spells, monster effects and traps could still remove it. so a strong trap like Mirror Force or even a monster like Penguin Soldier could quickly out-level 8 and cut your investment short. There was support to help level up your monsters back in the day in the form of the card called Level Up. It was a normal spell card that sends a level monster you control to the graveyard to summon a level monster listed in that monster's text from your hand or deck, ignoring the summoning conditions. This still stands as level monster's best support by allowing you to cut the middleman and get to your best level monster quicker. The only downside is that it's not directly searchable, and seeing multiple of them without any of your level monsters could end up breaking your hand and being useless. There were a lot of cards in the level archetype that could be used for the silent cards. Level Modulation was a spell card that allowed you to special summon a level monster from your graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions. Still, it couldn't attack or activate its effect on the turn, and your opponent draws 2 cards. While it sounds like you found a hack to summon your strongest silent monster without having to go through the hoops, the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh made sure to snuff this from happening, as cards with conditions that ignore summoning conditions from the graveyard can only bring out those monsters if properly special summoned first. So even though Level Up could bring out a level monster ignoring its summoning conditions, regardless of whether it was properly summoned, Level Modulation couldn't, because the rulings of where and when a monster's special summoning conditions can be ignored vary on where the monster is coming from. If you needed more reason not to play level monsters, an excellent, confusing ruling should be enough to coax you. Level also gained another weird card in Level Down, a quick play spell card that you can kind of figure out what it does. It is the complete opposite of Level Up. Return the monster to the deck and summon the level counterpart from the graveyard, ignoring its summoning conditions. This is a card you would never play, as you'd be out of your mind wanting to level down your hard-earned level monster. Its gimmick costs too much investment and effort to warrant seeing any play, especially if the monster's requirements for its leveling were already challenging in the first place. Overall, the archetype wasn't consistent to build or play. The effort wasn't worth the reward, and if you never saw Level Up at any point in the game, you were painfully trying to make sure monsters stay in the field long enough for you to get the necessary conditions. Even for a format like GOAT format, there were too many ways to remove monsters and stronger monsters that could easily punch your monsters in the face or remove them from the game via effects. So all level monsters, including our duo, didn't do anything on release. In September of 2016, Duelist Pack Rivals of the Pharaoh was released. The pack contained tons of nostalgic cards seen in the first season of Yu-Gi-Oh! And support for the Silent Duo. 5 cards were given to the Silent Duo with 3 monsters and 2 spells. Both Silent Swordsman and Silent Magician got specific support for their level lines in the creative form of Silent Swordsman and Silent Magician. Both had 1000 attack and defense and were level 4 light monsters. Silent Swordsman could only be special summoned from the hand by tributing a warrior type monster on the field. Once per turn during the standby phase, it gained a permanent 500 attack boost, and it could negate the activation of a spell card once per turn. Whenever it would be destroyed by battle or an opponent's card effect, you could special summon a Silent Swordsman monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Silent Magician pretty much did the same thing, except it could only be special summoned by tributing a spellcaster monster. When it's destroyed by your opponent's card effects or battle, you could special summon a Silent Magician monster from your deck, ignoring its summoning conditions. Silent Paladin was a level 4 warrior with 500 attack and 1500 defense. When normal summoned, you can add a Silent Swordsman level 3 or Silent Magician level 4 from your deck to your hand. Whenever a spell would target exactly one monster in the field during either player's turn, you can negate its activation. If this card is destroyed by opponent, either by battle or card effect, you can target a light level monster in your graveyard and add it to your hand. All 3 of these cards were solid additions to the Silent Duo series, giving you monsters that could easily float into any level monster you choose and give you a free spell negation once per turn as a bonus. However, by the time this card came out, level monsters were a thing of the past, and the game had archetypes that were way faster and more consistent than the level monsters. By 2016, cards that depended on your opponent to destroy them were considered slow, whether by battle or card effects. It's way more effective to pop your monsters whenever you see fit, so you can gain the effects when you need them and not have to worry about your opponent using another method removal on your searchers. This theory is proven true in multiple of decks like Cosmos, Dinosaurs, and Unchained, which have numerous effects that activate on being destroyed by card effects, including your own, adding more consistency to their play and allowing them to establish their board more early on and to their liking. With Silent Magician, Silent Swordsman, and Silent Paladin, there wasn't any ability to do that because their card effects left all the decision in your opponent's hands. With so many other options available in Yu-Gi-Oh that weren't just by destruction and battle, you rarely see any chance to put your strongest level monster on the field with the Silent Monster's effects. The only way you could possibly get their summoning effects off was by ramming your monster into your opponent and praying that your opponent would let it go through without responding to their effects. So even though this improved how you'd usually summon Silent Swordsman or Magician, it was still inconsistent. You'd have to pray that your opponent didn't want to read the card. They also introduced signature spells for each of the members of the duo. Silent Sword Slash was a quick play spell that lets you target one of your Silent Swordsman monsters and give it 1500 attack and defense. And if it does, your card would be unaffected by your opponent's card effects for the rest of the turn. Its activation and effect also couldn't be negated. To make this card even more epic, you can banish it from your graveyard to add a Silent Swordsman monster from your deck to your hand. Silent Burning was also a quick play spell, and its effect and activation couldn't be negated and removed from the graveyard to add a Silent Magician from your deck to your hand. What made it different was that it needed a Silent Magician monster and could only be activated during the battle phase when your opponent had fewer cards in hand than you do, where each player would then draw until they have 6 cards in hand. Could you guess which one of them got the cooler card? Silent Sword Slash took the cake and ate it at the same time. Your Silent Swordsman becomes an unstoppable force by boosting its stats and making it immune to your opponent's card effects at any time. So if your opponent wanted to torrential tribute or remove your monsters by any means, you could simply slap down this card without worrying about it being negated. However, your opponent could respond with another effect in chain to try to get rid of your swordsman before Silent Sword Slash resolves. Also, even though the immunity was only until the end of the turn, the attack boost was permanent. So regardless of whether you had the retrain, a level 5 or a level 8, you had a monster with well over 2500 attack. This card was sound all around. If only we could say the same for Silent Burning. Understandably, the effect was supposed to help get your Silent Magician level 4 into level 8, but the drawbacks were horrendous. For one, the card was only activatable during the battle phase as a way to prevent this card from being abused during the main phase, and to balance out that this card is a soft once per turn, even though it would have been better to just make the card a hard once per turn. But what do we know? We're just filthy casuals. The most egregious act was that this card needed your opponent to have fewer cards than you to activate. You were helping your opponent replenish their hand to gain spell counters to level up, making this a terrible trade-off. So if your opponent enters a battle phase with just 1 card and you had 4, who gets rewarded with 5 new cards as they attempt to finish you for game? Furthermore, isn't it a redundant card even if you get 5 spell counters? You'd still have to wait until your next standby phase to level up. So regardless of whoever's battle phase it was, you'd still have to wait a turn, unless you have level up. There was nothing good about this card to get Silent Magician level 8 to the field quicker, especially when it benefits your opponent more than it does you. 4 out of 5 cards being playable for the archetype wasn't bad though. Out of both the Silent Duo monsters, there was no doubt that Silent Swordsman was the better of the two. The upside of potentially getting a walking, talking Imperial Order is way more appealing than just being unaffected by spell cards. Why be unaffected by a few spells when you can just negate them all? Although the Silent Magician level up line was shorter, its condition was more demanding and entirely dependent on your opponent drawing cards. This can also backfire if your opponent had decks with direct search. Most of Silent Swordsman had a bit of complexity, but requirements were more accessible to meet, like level 3 just needing to exist until the standby phase on your turn, and level 5 requiring you to do direct damage. Let's not forget that Silent Sword Slash was an absolute unit of a card. Immunity for any Silent Swords monster, a permanent attack boost not being once per turn, can search for any Silent Swordsman monster, trumps helping your opponent add a fresh set of cards to their hand. Silent Swordsman was more rewarding to play and seemed better supported than Silent Magician. That's how the competitive meta sees the archetype, but surprisingly, it was completely different from how the Duel Links meta saw these cards. In Duel Links, Silent Sword Slash and Silent Magician were strong techs would introduce. Silent Sword Slash helped decks enable OTKs due to the attack boost and its protection. And in Duel Links, you start with the 4,000 life points in a 20 card deck instead of 8,000 life points in a 40 card deck like in the regular TCG. You didn't even need the whole level of Silent Swordsman, as the combo just required you to play level 3 alongside Cursed Bamboo Sword, a bamboo sword of your choosing, and 2 Silent Sword Slashes so you could attack your opponent directly for the OTK. You could even get away with just using 1 Silent Sword Strike in the OTK, as long as you had another card that could increase its attack power, like Backup Rider, to ensure your monster climbed over 4,000 attack. This OTK was so consistent that Silent Sword Slash is still semi-limited in Duel Links to this day. It still sees play in certain decks alongside their retrained Silent Swordsmen in decks that can run warriors like Joker Knights, who can easily be tributed to put Silent Swordsmen on the field and use cards like Arcana Trump Choker or Joker Straight to discard the Sword Slash to search for Silent Swordsmen with its graveyard effect. The fact that decks still main deck this card when it's semi-limited over meta staple cards speaks volumes, as if you run semi-limited cards in Duel Links decks, you can only play 2 semi-limited cards total in your entire deck. So if you wanted to run 2 sets of semi-limited cards, you can only run one or the other or one of each. Silent Magician also did well in Duel Links. It was a free spell negation that gets stronger every standby phase with the manageable summoning condition and tributing a spellcaster, making it splashable in decks with high spellcaster counts like Spellbooks, Magician Girls, and even Pendulum Magicians. And could still float into a level 8 if it's destroyed by your opponent. Needless to say, Duel Links was the perfect place for them to succeed and see play. The effects fit right in with the meta, and they truly got to shine with playstyle, whether as an engine or a small tech. In the cool world of competitive play, however, they were awful. They were already doomed when created as part of the level series, with unrunnable support and strict conditions to activate their effects. The later support was a bit better, but it hugely depended on your opponent's responses to how they dealt with their retrains. The support also clashed with one another, as even though they were an archetype, they still had separate playstyles and had you choosing which one was better than the other, and that was almost always favored towards Silent Swordsman, except in Duel Links. You also did not have enough support to fix their issues, which is surprising since they did fix one of the level Archetypes monsters without making overpowered in Armed Dragons by making the Armed Dragon Thunder monster series. Perhaps it was the fear of decks having access to Silent Swordsman level 8 and crippling the game, or they just wanted to make a quick buck out of all three of the people who thought Silent Swordsman was cool. It does have a nice hat and sword. Unfortunately, it doesn't have a nice playstyle, and it only makes sense that this archetype joins the failed cards and mechanics community.